Greetings, everybody. I'm Andrew Stuck. I'm one of the co-producers of Walk, Listen, Create. And Walk, Listen, Create is a social enterprise which we set up last year to support artists, writers, performers, composers, etc. And we've been running Walking Writers Salons. This is the fifth one. And in which we invite a guest who has written about walking, and we tend to want to find out about their approach to writing, and not perhaps less to talk about walking itself, because most of us are fairly familiar with that. So I'm delighted that our guest is Duncan Minshull. He's been described as Britain's walking laureate. And as you probably all know, he has a new anthology on walking published by William Collins, in which he invited 20 contemporary authors to write about walking. We'll come to that in a minute. Okay, Duncan. Duncan is formerly, hello, Duncan, formerly a BBC radio producer for many years. He now writes and publishes books about the joys of travelling on 2 feet. Titles include While Wandering for Vintage, Beneath My Feet and Sauntering for Notting Hill editions. And in this month, as you know, comes Where My Feet Fall, a book of essays that consists of 20 international writers recalling a past walk. And he's also written about walking for The Times, The Telegraph, The Guardian, UK Vogue, Psychology's Slightly Fox and The Big Issue. And for me, it was a real pleasure to read this collection of writing about walking. It included some familiar names, and it also included several writers that I've not yet encountered, and others whom I hadn't realised got so much to do with walking either. So Duncan, can I start by, where does the title of the anthology come from?
From somebody else. Took me in. I did lots of walks. Good evening, everybody, by the way. Thank you for coming along. I did lots of walks around my neighbourhood trying to come up with a title at the end of it, and couldn't find any. And as they say, you know, when we go for a walk, we take our mind for a walk as well. It didn't work in my case. And so I had to just go to one of the writers and filch a nice sounding collection of words from one of hers, and she said yes. And going for a walk, trying to come up with your own ideas doesn't always work. It didn't in my case, so I had to sort of borrow it off one of the essays. But I quite like it. I came up with the subtitle. That's all I did.
Okay, and how did you come to choose the authors? That must have been quite a tricky one.
It wasn't too bad, simply because I worked at the BBC for about 20 years, and I used to commission people a lot to write short stories for Radio 4 or essays for Radio 3. So I sort of knew quite a few writers who could probably do it. That is, write about a walk they've been on recently, or go on a new walk and put it down in 2,000 to 3,000, 4,000 words. So I'd say about 12 of the writers I knew already from just past history, and then I just tried my luck with about 8 writers I hadn't worked with before, and I asked altogether probably 23 people, and 20 said yes, and I was quite pleased with that return. And it just struck me that a lot of I wanted to avoid lots of hikers and mountaineers and naturalists. I didn't want, because I think there's enough of that sort of stuff around. I wanted, you know, I even asked quite a few people who don't do a lot of walking to go on a walk, and so it would be fresher with them because their observations wouldn't be well trammeled. You know, they wouldn't have written about it a lot. So there were a few walking virgins in there actually, which is always good. And I was delighted that they all said yes. Every time I asked somebody, they said it's a great idea. Also coincided with the beginning of COVID and these lengthy lockdowns. And as you'll remember, in the mists of time, we were all walking 2 years ago because it was one of the only things we could do during lockdown, apart from, a bit of yoga and bread making, and that was about it, really. So people discovered their feet like they hadn't discovered them before, which amused me.
And that was the case with some of these authors, was it?
I think a few of them are established walking writers or writing walkers. So you need a few of those in there, but quite a few of them said, thank you, you've opened my eyes up to something new, walking.
And what about the length? Why 3,000 to 4,000 words as an essay? What was the planning there?
I think I needed to. There was a practical reason. I needed to fit about 20 people in a book of this length, so you curtailed slightly. But
maybe I should ask you. That's an interesting question, because you're you're a curator of works. But how is the length of the book determined? Was that William Collins saying to you, "We want, 80,000"?
No, I never really asked them how many words they wanted or how many pages it was going to turn out with. But I just thought 20 was a nice number of people. Mm-hmm. It sticks in the mind. And I just said between 2,500 and 4,000 words because I thought that sort of accommodates a walk. You can go on a very long walk and write a short account on it. You can walk just to the end of the street and write 4,000 words. It's all to do with your own responses and what you get out of the walk. For instance, Ingrid Perso in the book, she does the Camino in the north of Spain, but she only wrote 2,500 words on it. And you think you do get whole books out of the Camino. But her 2,500 words were very good. And I realized for her type of walk, she was sort of one of the rookie walkers, one of the, first timers. For her type of walk, that's all she needed, 2,500 words. Whereas somebody like A.L. Kennedy wrote almost a mini novel. She wrote about walking from the cradle up to now with an actual walk included, which was up Skiddaw in the Cumbria, isn't it? But you got an entire history of her walking life, which was terrific as well, and that was 4,000 words. And then people just fell in between those two amounts of 2,500 and 4,000.
And are they all prose? Do they absolutely keep to the word limit, or do you get someone who throws in 6,000 and you have to?
No, nobody did that actually. I think they knew that if they would go over it, I'd have to cut it, and much better that they do the right length than some terrible person gets the red pen out and starts, cutting. Although I did do various cuts and various little alterations, and they were terrific. Most writers do take on board what an editor says, and that's good for both of you, good for the relationship.
So, do you see yourself first and foremost when you come to do an anthology as the editor, or do you see yourself as a kind of curator?
It's interesting. The word curator seems to be used all the time now. It's a new cool word, isn't it? Curator.
I don't know about that.
Lots of people curate these days instead of whatever. But you choose everyone, you commission them, the work comes in, and then the editorial work starts. You have to get it tip top, and then the hardest job I found, although very enjoyable, was putting the walks in their order. I started off with Richard Ford because he talked about starting off on a walk, and I ended with Patrick Gale because he wrote about coming to the end of a walk. So I had my bookends in there, but it was interesting how to group everyone up, and I went through many an attempt to order it. That was the big job, really.
I mean, you immediately you've named two absolutely mega sellers in terms of novels. I mean, I don't think there aren't many people on the planet who haven't published so many or sold as many books as Patrick Gale. But so, were the sort of people who wrote primarily or predominantly novels and others who wrote non-fiction? What was that kind of sort of balance?
It was just quite haphazard, and some of the pieces are like a formal essay, and other pieces almost verge on fiction. They're almost like short stories. There are two wonderful pieces by Sally Bailey and Harlan Miller. Sally talks about childhood walks in, I think it's near Lewes in Sussex, and Harlan Miller talks about his car breaking down on the hard shoulder and having to walk up the hard shoulder to find some petrol. And those two had the sort of the feel of short stories, although they both experiences happened. They just wrote. Maybe you could say it was almost like fictional memoir. And then others.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the story about walking up the motorway. It was frightening. It was.
Yes, it was.
It really did relieve that kind of panic that you've got, vehicles whizzing past you. It was quite something. Anyway, yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, he had to leave his two children with the car and then go and get the petrol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
very funny piece as well.
I mean, the other thing you did was you actually asked the authors to was it to sketch or photograph something? I mean, there are illustrations in the book, and some of them are good, and others are a bit, strange, perhaps put it that way.
Well, there's a moose, and there's Will Self. There's a naked Will Self, and there are quite a few photographs of dogs because everyone has a dog with them. I think there are about 4 or 5 dogs in the collection as well, which is great. And then there are photographs of the road ahead. So I just thought it was a nice memento for the readers to have something other than the prose, to maybe an indication of where people were going to walk. Yeah, they're like little mementos. And a lot of writers can sketch or they can doodle. And they can certainly take photos these days because we've all got our phones on us. And as you know, the camera in most phones is quite good these days. So most of them came out quite well.
And did those pictures tell 1,000 stories, 1,000 words? I don't know.
Yeah. Each picture's told 1,000 blisters. Yeah.
I'm not so sure. Okay, so, I mean, with books, you've really kept very much to being the editor curator of other people's work, but obviously,
I like that. Yeah, something I like doing. It's like writing a book with somebody else's words, and then you write the intro or you write some section intros, and it's that nice thing of when you've got pieces of work, putting them together to create an atmosphere or a paradox or a contrast or a continuation of a theme. I really like that, putting pieces of work next to each other and seeing how they feed off each other. That's always fun as well. There's a huge walking literature out there, which is why I've done these other anthologies. I mean, I used to write travel pieces, and of course when you go to a place, you discover it on foot. It's easily the best way. And then I realized everyone's been doing that for 400 years, exploration on foot. And a lot of them have written about it because writing and walking do go together, very much so. And there's an amazing literature, pedestrian literature out there, from in fiction, non-fiction, poetry, across all genres.
Yeah. So is there anything you think that hasn't been written about and should be written about, or do you think, because they, as you say, it comes from all genres. You have nature writing, travel writing, memoir. You've got the lot in there. But I mean, is there still areas to write about that haven't been written about, which involve walking, or do you think
I don't
it's
know. I always
we've
split
walked
the
it out?
walk. Yeah, I split walking literature into two camps: the sort of recreational, which is how you've described, and then the necessity of walking. People walk because they're poor, or they walk because they protest and go on parades, or they walk into battle even. And these sort of necessary walks have also been written about. Um, it's funny that when they went to the moon in 1969, was it? Yes, 66, 69?
69, 69.
69, yeah. Nobody wrote, well, I don't think they did. No, they didn't write about walking on the moon much. I mean, there's one great step for mankind, of course, but that's a metaphor. It's not, it doesn't tell us about actually walking on the moon, which I thought would have been amazing.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that. We actually ran a writing competition for the 50th anniversary of one small step, and we kept people to 50 words. So we had all these stories in 50 words. But you're right, there wasn't much written about it at the time, about that endeavour in terms of walking.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I was wondering of the authors that when you come to bring the work together into the anthology, um, are you? It sounds a crazy question, but have you almost written the introduction before the work comes in, or do you write the introduction once you've brought the pieces together?
For this book, I just wrote a very simple introduction of about 3,000 words, and I thought I'd write a little at the beginning of it. I'll just write a little sort of context thing about who through the ages has been walking, and then I thought actually do a roll call of all the writers and just hint or tease about their actual walk and try and put them into themes or clusters. I talked about all the dog lovers. I talked about the people who walked at night, because night walking is an entirely different experience. I'm interested in how when you walk forward, you're often going back in time, because you're either walking into history physically, or you're walking into your own history, because as you know, when we walk, our minds are elsewhere, and often our minds are on the past. And so I'm quite intrigued about how it's often a journey backwards. Is
Well,
the walk?
yeah. I mean, you've kind of preempted my question, my next question, because I was going to ask you, of the pieces that were written, which of those authors do you think were moved? They were moved by the experience of walking.
You mean emotionally?
Yeah, emotionally.
Yeah, I think most of them were actually. Maybe not Richard Ford, because he's skeptical about his own walking performances, and it was comic. It didn't seem so emotional. But I think a lot of them, like going back to Ingrid Perso on the Camino, she never thought she'd make the Camino, do it all, to walk most of it. So that was it wasn't a religious experience for her, but it was definitely a sort of emotional experience for her. And people like Josephine Rowe, walking in Newfoundland, walking with her former husband, happy memories of that, and walking through deserted settlements. That had a great emotional pull to it. Kamala Shamsi writes about walking in Karachi, about how that's all about friendship. Four of them get together, they meet once a year in Karachi, and they go for a walk, and that's the best way of catching up. That had a nice emotional pull to it. I think for all of them, it's not just an intellectual or physical thing. It is an emotional thing. Walking with friends, walking on your own, doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I think this is about the time when we should prompt questions from the audience and get them to ask you questions. I've got another whole string of questions I could ask Duncan, but you're all keeping very quiet. There doesn't seem to be much in the chat to go on. Apart from whether you're eating supper or not. I mean, I need some questions. But I mean, one of the things that I'll just mention is that I used to work in book publishing, and I worked in the department where we used to sell cereal and get as much publicity as we can. And those of you who are unfamiliar with that expression, selling cereal is selling sections of work into a magazine. And so that magazines could publish it. But one of the key things was to get a book into the book at bedtime slot or the book of the week slot. And it was incredibly competitive. There were literally dozens of publishers pitching dozens of books. And the person whose name we pitched it at was Duncan Minshull. So I warn you that Duncan has he's probably read a lot of books. He certainly knows a lot of books. So I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions which are about that. But what I'd like to pick up, Duncan, was that of the authors that you chose within the anthology, were there any that you thought would be better as audio to be listened to rather than read?
Oh, thanks for that, because I can now plug the audio version of this new book. HarperCollins did an audio version, and I haven't heard it yet. I read the intro, and then either an actor or the author themselves read their pieces. And a lot of authors can do a nice sketch or doodle or take a photo. Quite a few of them are good readers, either on the radio or for audio, commercial audio. So that was a nice experience, because it means the piece gets off the page and sort of goes for a walk orally. And, when you've got an audio like this one, you can either listen to it while you're out on a walk or at home, one of the two. Hopefully it's inspiring if you're listening to it at home and you just want to go out for a walk after. I've seen a few questions come up and then they disappeared.
Yeah, are you allowed to read? Are you happy to read them off the chat, or should we invite Cheryl to ask?
Oh, Cheryl Ann, yes, she came up with one first of all, didn't she? And then Ollie came up with a question as well.
So, Cheryl, do you want to ask away?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Duncan. I just wanted to know where you like to walk yourself, and do you like to go in a solitary way, or do you like to go with your companion?
First of all, I live in London, and London's a great walking city, and all over. And you can walk 15 minutes or 15 hours in London, and you'll always see something, or something will always happen. Out of London, I go to the Wye Valley a lot, up and down the Wye, near Monmouth, Tintern, round there. That's great. That's just a classic, country walk. And then, for the first time in forever, I think, I discovered the Jurassic Coast last year. Just basically East Devon. But what a wonderful coastline! That red cliff just going straight into the sea. And whenever you walk that, little bits would fall off and crumble, and it was almost like it was alive. And I think the littoral or the coastal is my favourite walk. Just to be on a beach, barefoot, and walk for mile after mile after mile. I think I love that walk as well. South Shropshire, near Ludlow, where Shropshire abuts Powys. Knighton, round there. Lovely, lovely part of the world. So I have my favourites. I'm going up to Inverness tomorrow, so I'm going to walk a bit of the coast near Aberdeen as well. I don't know up there much. Where do you go?
Well, I spend half the year in the Caribbean because I work out here as well. So we walk a lot here.
Are you in the Caribbean? You're in the Caribbean at the moment? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
It's a little island called Nevis, and we walk. We're on a peak, and we can walk into the rainforest, which is very magical. Oh. And then the rest of the time, I'm in London, walking there, or in Wiltshire as well, which I like walking in the Wye Valley.
That's three great contrasts, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah, they've all got their own attractions, no doubt. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very, very much.
Ollie, you have a question.
Hi guys, hi Duncan, you're right. I just
Hello.
have a question about, I daren't bring it up, but has COVID kind of changed the way that you look at your walks in terms of it going from this kind of hobby kind of day to day to a kind of necessary distraction? Like what
Um,
has the last 2 years kind of altered that in any way, would you say?
not for me personally, because I've always walked, but
Yeah.
I can see it for other people, and it pleases me. You know, I go into my local park is Hyde Park and Kensington Palace Gardens. I love those two parks, and I often do 2 laps, which takes about 2 hours. And you see people walking in there like never before during the last 2 years, and you know they're sort of new walkers in a way.
Yeah.
Also, those two parks are full of dogs, and it's great seeing dogs.
Most importantly.
I'm a dogless dog lover, so I love those parks for saying hello to a whippet or a greyhound or whatever. No, but you do see people starting to walk now. You know they weren't walkers before. You can tell, and I think that's COVID induced.
Mm.
Parks are much more. I mean, we're lucky in London in that we've got hundreds of parks, not just the royal parks, but we've got parks north, south, east, and west, and I think they used a lot, and that's very pleasing.
Mm. Fair enough, yeah.
No, that's great. Thanks, Ollie. Duncan, you better look out for Borrow My Doggy, the app, which allows you to borrow someone else's dog and take it for a walk.
I've heard of this, yeah, yeah.
What about Inish? Inish, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much.
Hello,
Very
Inish. Yeah.
Hello. Yes, my question is, within all those works, did you actually have any piece that was, apart from being an external or exterior walking, internal, a kind of internal journey within maybe a very external journey?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think most of the time we go for a walk, even if it's a beautiful day and there's lots to look at, i.e. it's an external walk. If you walk for, say, an hour and a half, there's part of that hour and a half where you go inward and a thought crops up. It could be a very obvious thought. You might be worried about your sister or, your job or something like that. And suddenly that external beauty gets lost because you're trying to work out this problem as you're walking forward. And I would call that an internal walk, obviously. And I think as far as these essays go, people do ruminate and they do think, and they often think about the activity of walking itself, or they digress into some little story. They might see something or hear something and it kicks off a little anecdote, so they tell us that en route. So you're right, it's never fully an external walk looking at the scenery, and if you're with a friend just talking to them all the time, you are taking your mind for a walk at the same time. Definitely that. Nietzsche, the philosopher, and he was a disturber as well. He used to say, we walk as fast as we think, and we think as fast as we walk. And that's true. And that's why a lot of writers walk, because, they don't know what to write about, or they're stuck at their desk. So they get up from the desk, they go for a walk, and the rhythm of walking and the body's happy drug, endorphin, gets going and gets the mind sharper. And if they get into the rhythm of thinking, then thinking can lead to creativity. So it's why a lot of writers and a lot of musicians walk, and always have done. Beethoven was a great walker, as was Erik Satie. and Freud was a great walker. So there is this connection between walking and bearing fruit, sort of intellectually. They are connected. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a quick question there, Duncan. When you go for a walk, and do you take notes while you're walking, or do you just do anything that you want to write about? You just do from recall, or do you take class or something?
I try not to take notes because it's quite nice to do things from recall, keep the mind sharp. But I find that if you sit down at your desk or go for a walk and say, I've got to come up with an idea for something, it never works. For me personally, ideas sneak up on you. The idea finds you rather than you find the idea. And this can happen anywhere. Could happen on a walk. It could happen in the middle of the night, and you have to get up and write it down somewhere. Could happen in the cinema. Could happen while you're having your breakfast. Yeah, I find the more you relax and the less you think about having to get an idea for something, then the more that idea will find you, and then that's good. That works.
That's great. Okay, we've got another question. Is it Kathy Teeling? Is it Catherine? I'm guessing.
Yeah. Hello. Yes, I like that idea, letting the ideas sneak up on you, because we do that with our students. You have to relax in order to digest things, and things then just suddenly appear. But I was just wondering about this, to flaneur, just to kind of experience and soak in stuff against. And there seems to be a movement of having walking meetings where you don't sit in a room to discuss things, you go for a walk. And the juxtaposition of people changes. You're not sitting opposite somebody and somebody's putting their hand up when they're going to speak, but they move around and they drop in little comments that sometimes the meetings don't necessarily get heard. So do you think it's probably a leveler if you walk and have a meeting, that everybody gets to be heard rather than they don't always get to be heard? I'm wondering what...
Yeah. I like the word leveler. I tell you who might have invented all that, or he definitely promoted it, and that was Steve Jobs of Apple. When he was alive, he would have these walking meetings on the campus of, the big office complexes where they were. He would take his teams for walks, and it is a leveler. It gets rid of hierarchy, doesn't it? The boss at the desk and the rest of you sitting around the boss waiting for him to utter or her to utter. Yes, it's a leveler, and I think if it is a leveler, it encourages you all to chip in, relaxes you, and you probably have better thoughts. The other thing about walking and on the emotional level as well, I've always found that my father did this. He was a great walker. If he had to talk to me about something, like bad exam results or shoplifting or whatever I got up to, he would take me for a walk rather than look at me at the opposite end of a table, because he was quite reserved and shy by nature. And he told me this later, again, the rhythm of a walk, you get talking more easily, and also you don't have to look at each other full in the face, which can make people go quiet. If you're walking beside someone, you can have those serious conversations. You don't seize up because you've got this pair of eyes on you. So yeah, you get an emotional bonding through that, and also through the physical. You're not eyeballing each other waiting for the first to say something. And I think it's right. Yeah. I think the modern office life is people stand up or they move around, and again, that gets rid of the formalities.
It's a bit like having conversations in corridors.
Yes.
Sometimes they're the most important conversations.
Yes.
They happen when you just meet in a corridor, as
yes.
opposed to. But
I think it works. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to pitch in here and say that something that we've done on quite a few kind of walking with groups is we get people to walk in silence beside someone they don't know. And what's extraordinary is that they then actually have quite a profound connection, and they talk a lot more than if you sort of introduce them and get them to talk straight away. And so I'm not quite sure why it is, but then if you get people to walk in step together in silence for like 3 or 4 minutes, that's all it needs, and then they're much more talkative than they are before because they're sharing there's some kind of energy and emotion that's going between them.
Mm. Yes, I think the sheer act of walking side by side, it's a bonding thing as well. You're aware of body language before either of you have even spoken. That's true.
Well, what I was going to ask, actually, I was going to chip in about whether you do circular walks or whether you go somewhere and come back. Because one things I've always found is that when I go on a kind of walk where I have to retrace my steps, I walk back much more quickly than I walked going out. And what's more, I not only walk more quickly, but I actually don't observe anything like as much, or I don't think I'm observing as much as I do when I'm walking out. And people have said to me, "Oh, well, Andrew, all you need to do is a circular walk, and then you're never walking back on yourself." But I'm just sort of kind of interested in whether there are things that you've noticed also, and through the literature, whether anyone kind of writes about that.
I haven't, but maybe it's got something to do with when you start out on a walk, you're at your most observant, so therefore it's an external walk. But by the time you do the U-turn and come back, you've done all the looking around, and that's when the mind takes over. I think I've experienced that quite a lot. You know, say you do a 2-hour walk, and the first hour is all about being close to nature or being close to the city you're in or whatever. But on the way back, it's almost like the mind has taken over. So they're almost like two different types of walks in the same 2 hours. But I used to do circular walks with my mother because she, in her later life, she was a great walker as well. And in her later life, she had dementia. And where she lived, they had a circular garden. And even inside, it was a huge place inside, they would have circular floors. And I think the thing about the circle was it stopped people worrying about getting lost. They knew if they just kept on the path, they'd end up back where they started. That's why, you know, in cloisters, you get the circular cloisters. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's got something to do with, you know, you put two clergy together and they can talk about God without worrying about where they're going. So they just kept walking round and round, you know. And there's something to be said for the circular walk.
Okay, well, Cheryl, you have another go at question, and then what we'll do is we'll move into the quiz. So, Cheryl, over to you.
Well, I'm just always intrigued about getting lost because I get lost quite a bit. But I find it's a positive experience, and I was just curious to hear what Duncan thinks about discovering something that maybe you hadn't set out to discover.
It's not. I agree with you. I think if you've got the time, why not get lost? And because you'll come across the unexpected, and part of the unexpected is you dealing with being lost. You know, you might have set out thinking, I'm going to go from A to B to C, and I'll be home in time for lunch. And lunch goes by and you're still lost out there. And what do you feel or think about being lost? There's a lovely little book called Of Walking in Ice by the film director Werner Herzog, who walked once from Munich to Paris in November. You know, it was a terrible walk, yeah. And he was getting lost all over the place, but he came up with a theory that if you get lost once, then what you need to do is get lost again and you'll end up finding yourself. I think it's just a load of baloney, but it's rather good baloney that he made up. But I always quote that: lost once, you're in trouble. Get lost a second time, and you're back on your path. His was an interesting walk. He went from Munich to Paris because he had a friend who was dying in Paris, and he thought if he walked to her bedside, the sheer act of will of walking would bring her back to good health, and it worked. But I recommend the book. It's only 80 pages long. It's a lovely little read of Walking in Ice. Yeah.
Great. Well, okay. Well, look, Duncan, thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for coming tonight. And once again, Duncan, I hope the book's a huge success. Have a great trip to Inverness.
Thank you very much. And I hope everyone has a nice evening or nice day wherever they are, and enjoy your walking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
See you all soon.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. All the best.
Thanks a lot.